we are gonna go ahead and talk to some folks. Let's do it. We're talking to Red Dead Red. Pronouns are they, them. Amazing name. I love it. I love Red Dead Redemption. Probably one of my favorite game series ever. Red Dead Bread. You are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you just fine.
Oh, all right. Hi. First time, long time, I guess. Right now I'm just reaching out. I live in California, more specifically the coastal San Francisco Bay Area region. And for me, in my day-to-day life, religion doesn't necessarily come up that much, but just listening to some of your calls, as well as just looking at some other atheist resources and all that sort of thing online, it seems to come up in, say, your lives or some of the other callers' lives a lot more compared if they live somewhere a bit more Midwest or Southern. And yeah, I was wondering, sorry?
No, I'm just saying, sure, I totally agree with you, right? It's like you have to grow up in a certain part of the world for it to be more relevant to you. If you grow up in places like, I imagine, LA, San Diego, that like I've been to those places, they don't care. They really don't care as much as they do in like places where I grew up, right?
Exactly,
so yeah, and just to finally get to my question, I'm wondering if just sort of the environment in which you're raised, in those sort of posts, you can generally sort of feel a lot more anger coming from the atheist in that situation, either if they're deconverting or in that area sort of deconverting. Not to say anything about like the stuff you were talking about or previously about crimes being covered up or anything, just general anger at religion or just the world they grew up in as a sort of thing. And I was wondering, I guess, how much do you think just the environment of where you grow up and where you basically live in, how much does the religiosity sort of affect the nature of your atheistic beliefs or vent sessions, as it might sometimes be?
Well, that's interesting. Like, yeah, I think I understand your question, right? Like, what my environmental outset, right? Like, how does that affect me today? How does that inform my worldview, right? And so obviously I've talked about this before. I grew up in Waco, Texas, right? Which is like, it's dead center of heart of Texas. Okay. You average conservative like stereotype that you can think of in your head, like that's most of Waco, right? So that's just how it is. That's just how I grew up around. And so like even if I wasn't in church, I would still get those religious values and which are ultimately political values, right? Just in my day to day. So there's definitely an influence there. And we often comment on this, but religion isn't separate from politics. In fact, I would say like they're so intermingled, you almost can't tear them apart, right? Because they're both ideologies that inform your worldview, inform how you should act and react to the world around you. So I grew up around conservatives that got angry at every single thing that Democrats did. I grew up around conservatives that were mad at Obama for just like breathing. I like people who literally thought Obama was like a Muslim in disguise, right? And actually helping Al Qaeda and stuff like that. That wasn't uncommon, I guess. So obviously, like a little bit of that would rub off on me, and eventually, like my views about gay people, my views about trans people, were also affected by that outcome. So I think like part of the reason why you see the atheist community so much angrier in that respect is because like that ideology influenced us so much that it allowed us to become bigots. It allowed us to treat people differently, and it affected us in ways that we're still trying to figure out every day, honestly, just by a daily deconstruction and realizing how those systems affect us. So I don't know, maybe you can speak to some of that too, Trevor.
Yeah, well, I was thinking like too about how so I grew up in a very religious family, like not just my immediate family, uncle's a pastor, cousins are really into religion. It's like everybody around me, and I lived in a small town that was very religious. But then you look at my co-host in my podcast, and he didn't grow up religious. He didn't grow up with that at all. He grew up in a very liberal town. And so the way we react to things is very different. Like, I think I get a little bit more angry than he does because I've seen just how it can hurt people. And I think it's a lot from perspective. I've also, I have anxiety, so I get angry at, my Uber driver or something some days. So it just depends. But yeah, I think, there's definitely outside influences on that for sure.
It's kind of like asking, like, man, why, why as a queer person do you get mad when people talk about gay people negatively, or why do you get mad at bad representation and stuff? It's like, because as a queer person, like, that affects your life. That is you. And for me, as a former Christian, right, it's like, why do I get mad at the Christians? Because I live that life, and I know that you can think differently on these topics. You know what I mean? Like, you can definitely, you don't have to have the Bible as a worldview central to you. But if that's completely foreign to you, I get why that looks off-putting. And it's like, man, why do you care so much about this thing? Because that's my friends and family, you know?
Yeah, totally fair. And then I also I wanted to sort of get both your opinions on this idea I've seen floated around where sometimes Christian deconverting former Christian atheists sort of bring on sort of the preachiness orthodoxy of Christianity, where they can be right, everyone else is wrong, and they sort of that also forms a bit of their lashing out. I think I've seen that a little bit sometimes, I want to say, but I want to get your opinion on it too.
I mean, that's true. That's true for pundits of any ideology, right? Like, you look at all the leftists you see on Twitch that stream or stuff, or the conservatives that have their own podcasts and stuff, right? Like, you can always find one group in a worldview that's gonna be like that kind of thing. I think the atheist community gets that rap. I mean, rightfully so. I'm not gonna say that it's not true, only because, like, we have nothing but criticisms to really say, right? Like, the second that we praise these systems, right, that we give credit to these institutions, then people use that against us and say, well, this undermines your entire point. These things are fine, and we should just keep them as the way they are. But, like, I am interested in dismantling these systems personally. I don't think that they should exist, and so that puts me in the position of being a contrarian, which naturally leads to, like, kind of that angry rhetoric that you see. But people approach it differently. I try to be chill about it as most I can.
Same.
But it's hard not to get mad, right,
Oh,
Trevor?
exactly. It is. And I was thinking too, like you were talking about, I remember back in the day when I was a church guy, and if somebody like came off the streets and cleaned up and came to Jesus and stopped their wicked lives or whatever, they were the most passionate for God and for getting the word out there about God. It was always like the new person coming in who was like, have you heard about this? And I think there's a bit of that too, where it's like you're believing one thing your whole life, and all of a sudden your whole life turns upside down, and you're like, did you know this? Or did you know about this? And other people like, yeah, we don't care, you don't have to preach that to us. And I'm like, but I want everyone to know. And so I think there's an element of that in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on, and good night to you both.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the call. It is important. Yeah, it's important to point this out because, like, I definitely thought that way. I still think this way about the atheist community, that it's a bunch of, like, whiny white dudes that go off about every which thing, right? It's like, that perception is definitely changing, of course. Obviously there's a lot more people in the movement that can kind of fill it out with their voices and perspective.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be anger, but like anger does kind of drive it. You know,
Yeah.
it really does at the end of the day. I don't do this stuff because I'm completely chill
Yeah.
with the world that I grew up in,
Yeah.
and you know, the stuff that happened to me and other people, right? It's like I want that to change, and that can inspire passion and emotion, which oftentimes comes to anger, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, just look at like what's happening, like you said, with politics and stuff like that. Like you guys have like actual people from like in your Congress saying that Christian nationalism is cool and we should totally do that. And it's like that stuff's scary and we
Right.
should be angry about that.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, right? Like that's another thing too. If you consider yourself someone who's politically interested, right? Who wants to understand, especially American politics
Hmm.
and how it works, you have to have a pretty intimate understanding of religion, specifically the kind of Christian nationalism and evangelicalism that happens, you know, in this country, because it's
Yeah.
so influential to how people vote and how policy is decided. And
Yeah.
it's crazy, but it is how it is.